Denver Broncos mandatory minicamp kicks off today, and there are 3 young players you need to keep your eye on. We'll tell you why Riley Moss, Jonah Ellis, and Troy Franklin are names of Broncos Country should keep their eyes on here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you once again to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. A special shout out to all the everydayers out there as well. We appreciate you so much for making the show exactly what it is. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person daily in Dove Valley during the regular season, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger. He's been a longtime expert and cover of the Denver Broncos for predominantly orange.com. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. And look, Broncos Country with mandatory minicamp set to begin here on Tuesday morning. We're going to take a look at 3 young players that we have our eyes on this week. In particular, when we take a look at different positions on offense and defense, we'll look at Troy Franklin and maybe how he's growing along and still getting acclimated to the playbook. We'll look at Jonah Ellis picking up a lot of momentum at the edge rusher position. But we're going to kick things off with Riley Moss, who's in a position battle to try to get a starting job on the outside opposite of Patrick Surtain. And look, Sarah, I mean, this is there's a multitude of positions here for the Broncos as we all know going into training camp. They're going to have a lot of competition. There's going to be a lot of exciting storylines that follow it. You and I are kind of in agreement a little bit. The cornerback seems to be one of the more intriguing ones considering some of the things that we've been made to know. We just talked about Jaquan McMillan on yesterday's episode of the show for all the everydayers that may have missed that in Broncos Country. But for Riley Moss, the question is, can he emerge? He is battling for a spot. And I think the question that we're going to have here is, will we see him at practice this week? Obviously, last week dealt with a little bit of a back injury, tweaked his back. Will he be back getting reps on the field? I think it's important that he does.
It's really important that he does, especially because of the fact that we've been talking about Jaquan McMillan so much, and he does seem to be gaining the trust of the coaching staff. And yeah, we know that 3 corners are going to play the majority of the season defensively, as teams spend roughly 70 to 80% of their time in the nickel, at least, right? If not dime, an additional percentage on top of that. So there's a lot of snaps that are going to be available. It's just a question of, we really want to see whether or not Riley Moss, can he live up to that draft status? The fact that the Broncos traded up for you. The Broncos traded up to get this guy, and he proved last year that he was up to the task on special teams, made some really impressive plays on special teams, but they didn't trade up to the 83rd overall pick in last year's draft just to have him play special teams. They traded up to get him because he's got some of the best ball skills from that year's class, from last year's class, and he can make plays when the ball is in the air, and he goes up and creates takeaways. He forces fumbles. He makes plays after he takes the ball away. So there's a lot to like about Riley Moss. The thing is that if you're not out on the field, you're not stacking together those days. I know that Sean Payton has talked about, the overall evaluation, like how much do OTAs play into that, and kind of talked a little bit about how, well, there's no pads on out there. It's tough to evaluate everything. So like it is very early in the offseason, but I would say just as a general larger scope sort of topic, Riley Moss practicing now and stacking days now is incredibly important towards him making the kind of impact on the 2024 team that he really needs to make.
Well, and on top of that as well, it was disappointing for him. This was something beyond his control. But last year in training camp, we saw one day of practice. I think it was a couple of days. Like, all right, hey, we go through our 90-man roster. We're checking who's in attendance. And Riley was there the first couple of days. Then all of a sudden you find out, well, he had core muscle surgery, something that pulled up. And that obviously held him out. And I could just tell you this by just being in the locker room and talking to Riley throughout the season when he was still on that short-term IR, not able to come back yet. He was chomping at the bit, anxious, like wanted to get on the field. I mean, there was one point, I think early on, I think it was week 3 or week 4. I said, hey, how you feeling? You getting excited? You getting anxious? And he says, I really need to get on the field because I got a lot to take out in terms of that. And you saw that right away, like coming in on special teams as a gunner on the punt team, getting down there on kickoff. It's like, all right, hey, this is a guy who is frustrated that, hey, his opportunity, because he was going to compete with Damari in training camp for the starting job. Well, Damari gets injured during training camp. Riley gets injured during training camp. They bring in Fabian Moreau, who is just like, all right, veteran guy. We don't know if he's going to make the roster. We didn't know how that position room was really going to fill out last year. Whereas now it seems like there's a little bit more solidarity in terms of guys who are healthy right now. The hope and knock on wood is that guys can continue to stay healthy. But you need, if you're Riley Moss, this is your opportunity now to make the biggest impact, the biggest impression before training camp. Give something for the coaches to stew on for 5 weeks, as they're going to be at the team facility almost every day as they build up for training camp. And then when training camp comes on, you know exactly what situations you're going to put these guys into. And as a coach, you know, okay, this is an area, look, Riley does this well, but here's where we want to test him, right? Let's get him involved in this. You're going to see a lot of that for so many guys, not just Riley, but for Riley, the stakes are high for him because, as you mentioned, he was taken in top 100 position in the 2023 NFL draft. The team says that they view him, he's a guy that can start in the National Football League. Well, now Denver, if they're really embracing positional versatility, let's not even focus about outside corner here for a minute. Really, Riley's competing for 2 jobs. He's competing for an outside job, but he's also competing to maybe start in the nickel as well. So it's like there are opportunities for him and other corners at this group. But I think right now Broncos country has their eyes, the biggest outside of Jaquan McMillan, really on Riley and seeing, can he embrace and can he take one of these roles? To me, that's what I want to see this week. I want to see, can he get started there if he does step foot on the practice field this week after tweaking his back?
Yeah, and he's got to look fresh out there, right? He's got to look, explosive, and he's got to be able to not make a ton of mistakes. And I think you want to see these guys have the opportunity to fail forward when they're young players who are inexperienced, relatively speaking. But for Riley Moss, like we've talked about in the past, it's got to be a situation where he's hitting the ground running and he's out there. And it's not that he can't ever make mistakes, right? Or that he can't ever get burned deep downfield, but you don't want to look sluggish. You don't want to look like you just came off injury. You want to look like you're ready to come out and compete. And like that wait between minicamp and training camp is going to be a brutal one, because we want to see more of this guy. We got a taste of what we wanted at mandatory minicamp in terms of seeing him, just, I don't know, flip the hips, go make plays on the ball, just matching guys in coverage with his speed and quickness and instincts, and just showing that he's been studying in the film room. And I know the Broncos I'm sure they liked what they saw on the practice tape last year, Cody, because he did get increased reps defensively as the season went along. It was minimal, to say the least, but at the same time, they must have been liking what they were seeing to start throwing him out there a little bit more. And so it gives me encouragement knowing that we have no 2023 preseason to evaluate when it comes to like where even he was as an outside corner. So it's one of the biggest mysteries in the offseason for the Broncos is like, what are they getting from him outside at corner, or what are they getting from him in the slot? Because nobody other than this coaching staff that watched every practice last year really knows.
Yeah, and I think that's the exciting thing, the appeal of it. Like there's a lot of allure to where this thing can go here. And obviously I think we're all hopeful. Like Riley's a great dude, very, very nice guy, always great with me behind the scenes. But it's like, now it's like you're in your second season where really you kind of had your rookie season wasn't necessarily like the rookie season you had hoped for. I think Riley anticipated playing a lot last year, didn't see that. So I think for him, he's coming into everything with a chip on his shoulder. Can he emerge and maybe snag an outside spot or maybe inside the slot? Or, even if he gets into the rotation defensively, I still think that's a success because you are going to get to see an on-field evaluation about him. So Broncos country, we want to know what you think about Riley Moss, the expectations for him. Make sure if you're watching or listening, wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube, the Locked On Broncos, that you let us know. But we are going to talk about another player who's got some momentum that's building, and really a position group in general that has a lot of momentum brewing behind it. Jonah Ellis, where is he at in terms of the Broncos rotation, and what can we expect to see from him this week at mandatory minicamp? You'll get that much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And look, as we get a little bit closer to the month of July, we're getting close to summertime. And summertime means baseball. It means the NBA Finals and more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. And right now, new customers, they get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you sign up as a brand new customer here today and you place a $5 bet anywhere and it wins, you're automatically going to get $200 in bonus bets. That's $200 that you can use to bet everything from finals MVP, who wins the NBA finals, or to who's going to hit one out of the park during one of your favorite baseball games that you're going to be watching. So make sure you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
Broncos rookie pass rusher Jonah Ellis, the team's third-round pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, has got some momentum going into mandatory minicamp. We'll see if he can keep it going this week, as the team has 3 practices that we're going to evaluate every single day this week here on Locked On Broncos. And for all of you everyday listeners of Locked On Broncos out there, man, mile high salute to every single one of you. Shout out to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, especially as we gear up this offseason for, man, a lot of roster discussions, a lot of potential breakout players, a lot of guys that you're going to want to know what's going on at practice. Cody will be out there every day. We'll be talking about it every day. And this offseason, you can expect the best Broncos offseason coverage from us right here, Locked On Broncos on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And hey, if you've been getting sick of the national media not talking about the Denver Broncos, because they really haven't been, unless they've been talking bad about the Denver Broncos, there's a way that you can get curated coverage that you want every single day. It's called the Locked On Sports Today show, and it's the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel that's on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. So Locked On Sports Today, it's going to be right there for you whenever you need it, 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of the Locked On Network, plus the national shows that cover every single league. So find Locked On Sports Today, now available in the Fire TV channels app. Let's talk about Jonah Ellis a little bit as we get into mandatory minicamp, because there was some building buzz about him at OTAs. And I know that was only one practice each week that people were able to go out there and see. So for him to be a talking point after only being able to see one practice a week for 3 weeks of voluntary OTAs is pretty substantial, in my opinion, Cody. So I'm interested to know, like, what did you see from Jonah out there when you were able to watch practices, as well as, like, what are you expecting from him here as we get into mandatory minicamp?
Yeah, a lot too, because like this is a position group that I feel like a lot of Broncos fans are like, we don't know, like we're waiting for somebody to emerge there. Whereas I feel like every edge rusher that we've seen so far at that position, they've had a good practice, whether that's Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning, Nick Bonito, and Jonah Ellis. For me, I think the one thing I want to see here, Sayre, like Jonah dominated, in my opinion, and was consistent against the second team offense and the third team offense when he was getting reps at outside linebacker. Why not sprinkle him in on a couple of plays against the first team O and see how he does, maybe opposite of Baron Browning, a Jonathan Cooper, or a Nick Bonito? Like, see what he can do in that situation with the ones against the ones. Like, that is what I want to see in terms of, okay, how do you evaluate it? We're probably not going to see that mandatory minicamp because you can't hit anybody. You can't really have contact. There's no pads. So what does that look like when you get to training camp, when that stuff comes on? I think you start building up and ramping up towards that here this week in mandatory minicamp. Get him into the rotation. Just see a couple of snaps there with the first team defense. Even if he's not projected to be the team starter, see what he can do with the unit, because ultimately, from my own roster evaluation standpoint, my own coaching philosophy is, well, if you lose a starter, is the next guy that you're going to have in there, can he do what you're asking your starter to do? Can he, like, if that player is going to miss time, is there a drop off in production there? Or can there be, a match level or maybe even a better level of play if that player is not in there? That's what you have to find out when it comes to guys that are in the rotation in terms of your outside linebacker position. I think we all know the answer to Nick Bonito because he showed it last year. If Nick Bonito has to start, you're going to get good production out of him, right? We don't know that. We didn't know that about Drew Sanders. Probably won't know that this year. But now we have that question now for Jonah Ellis, who obviously the team took with a top 100 pick in this past year's NFL draft. So for me, can you get him into the rotation with the ones this week? I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing that potentially this morning at practice. We'll see if that is the case here.
Yeah, and it'll be fun to know if they do give him those opportunities, because that will confirm essentially what everyone's been saying about what they're seeing at practice, right? And it is tough to evaluate guys on the defensive front before the pads come on, granted, but at the same time, like, you can see the explosiveness, you can see the hand usage, you can see when I say instincts as a pass rusher, you see guys that know when to bend the edge, when to spin back towards the inside, when to use power, when to convert, speed to power, when, just all those different sorts of things. You can see that. That's one of the best things to evaluate when you're out there watching practices. If you're going to training camp in the summer, is to see, hey, how does this, defensive ends, edge players, they get those one-on-one opportunities quite frequently during practice. Can they set the edge? Did they over pursue? Did they get a hand on, the quarterback, or did they get close? Because you don't want to be touching the quarterbacks out there at camp. And so with Jonah Ellis, I think that is going to be critical for him to be able to do with that first team. You're not necessarily wanting reports out there that, man, Jonah Ellis was whipping Garrett Bowles or whipping Mike McGlinchey out there. You don't want those kind of reports, but at the same time, you kind of do, because you want to know that your rookie, that the Broncos talked about at the draft. Like, they thought about taking Troy Franklin at that. I think it was the 76th overall pick or something like that. They thought about taking Troy Franklin there. They said there was other guys on the board, but they didn't want to even think about moving back, because Jonah Ellis was somebody that they prioritized. And we saw the pass rush productivity last year from him at Utah. Just ask Caleb Williams about Jonah Ellis, right? Because he got after him a couple of times when Utah played USC. So there's a lot to like about this guy. One of the most underrated, I think, players in the Broncos draft class, just because of, like you said, there's Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito. I mean, there's not really a reason to feel like you have to buy in to Jonah Ellis this year. But man, if he comes out and has an impact in the rotation, that would be huge for a team that has desperately needed kind of an infusion of just consistency in the pass rush department.
Well, and you look at where Denver's production was, they haven't had a double-digit sack producer, I mean, really since Vance Joseph in 2018 when he was coordinating Bradley Chubb and Von Miller together. They got close a little bit because Nick Bonito had eight sacks, Jonathan Cooper had 8.5 sacks, and then Baron Browning, who missed a good portion of the season, had 4.5 sacks. So it's like, all right, you're seeing these guys get production. Can your other guy come in and do the same thing? Like, that's where I think the Broncos offseason additions on the defensive line could open up a multitude of opportunities for Baron, for Jonathan, for Nick, and also now Jonah coming into it. I think what you are going to see consistently from Jonah, and I think the big thing, can he stay healthy? I mean, his shoulder 100% clear, checked out. He's good to go. The Broncos did their background on medicals, but this is a guy who I think is just a technically sound football player. And I'll give you an example, and I'll try to demonstrate this and verbalize it to a way that gives Broncos fans the ability to visualize it. Jonah's playing wide outside of the tackle there. There's a run play that it's an inside zone handoff to the other side where, okay, Jonah is stabbing the outside shoulder of the offensive tackle, and he's kind of squeezing it down. He's not getting too far upfield. He's not getting to the point where he's trying to get underneath the shoulder of the offensive tackle to dip behind the line of scrimmage, because then if there's a run that's coming back your way, well, they could just cut back inside. He plays discipline to the point where he's understanding, like, hey, my job here, if there's run away to me, I can't just necessarily chase behind the play. I had to squeeze it down hill line depth. And if there's something coming back my way and it goes to the outside, I'm responsible for outside contain. He's very disciplined in that regard. You saw that early on, but granted, I mean, guys are really just grabbing jersey at that point. Offensive tackles are grabbing jersey. When the pads come on, are we going to see that production carry over in a different sense? To me, that has me a little bit more excited about Jonah Ellis. And I think you are going to see that consistency from him this upcoming season. Is it going to lead to a multitude like double-digit sacks? I don't know. Like, we have no idea just yet. But if Jonah can be the guy that the Broncos think he can be, if he can be even just a resemblance of the guy that he was at Utah, Denver's getting a really good player, and he'll have a big role for them this upcoming season on the defensive side of the ball. Now, in terms of other Broncos rookies, we're talking about another guy here on today's episode of the show, Troy Franklin, as he's getting acclimated with the playbook at a deep wide receiver room right now in terms of the number of guys there and maybe some guys that are proven and ahead of him at this point. Why is Troy Franklin separating himself and maybe putting himself in a position to thrive this season? We'll tell you why here on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. Troy Franklin might not be in the top rotation right now for the Broncos wide receiving core, but there's a chance that he can find himself in a position to thrive this upcoming season, regardless of who the quarterback is. We'll tell you why here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Real quick, I want to say thank you once again to all the everydayers in Broncos country for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. We have you covered all year long. Broncos country, look, you may listen to us on a Monday and a Tuesday, but if you're missing out on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday's episode, you're missing out a whole bunch of Broncos information that we get fresh, objective coverage of. So make sure if you're listening on Mondays and Tuesdays, make sure you start listening Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. We have you covered every step of the way. We appreciate you so much here. Let's talk about Troy Franklin, obviously the top teammate for Bo Nix at the University of Oregon the past 2 seasons in terms of touchdowns and obviously accolades. Troy Franklin, I was at the car dealership this past week, Sarah. I was buying a new vehicle, and one of the dealerships had on the Pac-12 channel, right, the Pac-12 network, and they were showing a bunch of Bo Nix games. I don't know if it was just a University of Oregon showcase, but they were showing the game against Washington, that first one there, where unfortunately the kicker missed the field goal at the end of regulation. As Bo Nix led an impressive drive downfield to put him in a position to tie the game, to maybe send it into overtime. But you're watching Troy Franklin catch passes. You're watching a USC game where all of a sudden Troy Franklin's running a drag across the field, catches it, goes 80-plus yards for a touchdown, and where Bo just absolutely lit up that USC Trojans defense. And I kept thinking to myself, like, I'm excited about what this guy can potentially do. Now, is it going to be with Bo Nix? I think in best case scenario for the Broncos, that's what Sean Payton hopes, is that Bo Nix wins the starting job, and maybe you have that connection here. But I think the one obstacle you look at for Troy Franklin that's really I think has the perception right now, maybe not as high as it needs to be, is, okay, well, Cortland Sutton's returning this week. Tim Patrick is back. Marvin Mims is going to have an accelerated role, and Josh Reynolds has been consistent, was one of their top free agent underrated acquisitions there. So there's 4 receivers, 3 of those guys with NFL proven production. And then you have Marvin, who you hope can be that guy. And then you have Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, Luke Jordan Humphrey. You've got Michael Bandy, who's been catching passes at Broncos practice. Well, Philip Dorsett. Like, it is a room that has a lot of bodies, but you look at the 3 proven guys that have a good production in the NFL. Everyone's wondering, where does Troy Franklin fit into the mix here? I don't think you're going to see a lot of him rotating in, getting reps with the first team right away, but I think it's something that we should monitor here potentially this week. There's so many guys, but it's the one thing I would say you see from Troy Franklin, Sarah, that I hope we get to see a little bit more of this week. I want to see him go downfield. I want to see the Broncos throw some downfield passes to him, or I want to see him more acclimated on crossing patterns around the middle of the field. I think all the passes that I've seen to Troy Franklin so far during OTAs have really kind of been to the outside, like an out route or, a hitch or a curl. I want to see some of the things he did at Oregon translate over. To me, Troy's a player that I have my eyes on this week at practice that I'll hopefully be able to provide more updates on.
He has the benefit, I want to say, of, like you said, kind of being buried on the depth chart right now, as far as like kind of playing with house money a little bit. The perception on Troy Franklin was what? Like, I mean, he's supposed to be a 2nd-round pick, one of the biggest steals of the 2024 NFL draft. And so the fans' perception of Troy Franklin is basically that he's a 2nd-round pick. Well, the team's perspective of Troy Franklin is that he's at best the 5th receiver on the depth chart and a 4th-round pick. Not to say that they don't value him or that they didn't believe he was a steal, because they did. And Sean Payton and George Payton both talked about that at the time of the draft. But I think the fans' expectations of Troy Franklin are a lot higher in the immediate than they maybe necessarily should be. But what do we want to see from him at mandatory minicamp? Like you said, taking off downfield and creating separation at the catch point or before that with his long speed and making plays over the middle of the field. You want to see him creating separation and running a good route tree, being precise, not dropping passes, making plays on the ball deep downfield. Ultimately, just make it really hard for the Broncos to not carve out a game day role for you. Like, that's what you have to do if you're buried on the depth chart all offseason, especially for somebody so talented as this. Like, that speed, you want to see it out there. You want to see him able to at least a couple of plays per game. Let's see what Franklin could do in terms of stretching the defense. And then over the course of the season, maybe he gets more opportunities, or maybe he helps create more opportunities for the running game, because when he's out there, teams know we're looking to throw the ball deep because he's proven that he can make those plays. So for him, I think it's once again, as we've talked about with a number of these other guys, stack these days in the offseason. Be the guy that's like, man, Troy Franklin made one of the biggest plays of the day today. I know that the Broncos have had a number of rookies in recent years who have been like that out at training camp. I think back to, I know it hasn't always worked out, but you think back to guys like Montrell Washington, who was just consistently making plays at practices. And you want that for Troy Franklin to at least gain enough momentum to be able to say, all right, like you've caused us to at least think about this. We need to make sure that we're getting him factored in to the rotation, as opposed to just saying, hey, let's take it really slow this year. Could be a redshirt year. No, you want him to force his way onto the field. And I think that it starts at mandatory minicamp with all of the receivers present.
What is one thing we have not really seen consistently of from the Broncos in the last couple of seasons? And honestly, we didn't even see a lot of it last year in Sean Payton's first season as the play caller and head coach of this offense. And we thought we were going to see a lot of it from Cortland, but Cortland's production came downfield more so than it did slants, like simple concepts, like the slant route. Like that has not been, I watch other teams on NFL Sundays before Denver plays, or if Denver's on a bye, like I'm watching other games and I'm sitting there, you're seeing these other teams and teams that maybe have even like worse offensive talent than Denver did. You're seeing them execute simple things and you're seeing guys produce on slants. I feel like Garrett Wilson, very talented, one of the best receivers in my opinion in the National Football League, but you know how abysmal the Jets offense was last season. But you're watching Garrett Wilson catch slant routes and, get 15, 16 yards. Like you don't need for Troy to run all the time at 10 to 15 yards, catch a pass at that depth and then go make plays. Troy is the type of guy you can run a 3-yard slant with. He can catch it about maybe 4 or 5 yards right on his initial break, and then he can get you 14, 15 yards. Like he can be that type of player. But I also think right now, maybe the one area that is hurting the perception of that, Josh Reynolds is a guy who can also do the same exact thing, even though Josh's production has really been downfield over the course of the last couple of seasons for him in the NFL. Denver has guys that I feel like you look at Cortland, you look at Tim, both sizable guys, a lot of size. As Sean Payton said, actually the wide receiver room says it makes him a little anxious to see how it's all going to play out for him. But you look at Cortland, you look at Tim, guys can do the same thing. They can move outside, they can move inside. You look at Marvin, who's the guy really that can do what he does a little bit. I think Jalen Virgil can be that guy. I look at Josh Reynolds, who's a guy that can do the things that he can in terms of player vision. I think Troy Franklin fits that mold as well. So maybe that is the basis. Maybe that's where Sean Payton is heading with all this is, okay, we have for our starters, this is the role in the vision. We need the guys behind them to be able to come in and do the same exact thing. Then look, I feel like we've forgotten a little bit about Brandon Johnson a little bit. And I apologize. Like we don't intend in any way, shape or form to ever disrespect any of the players here, like Brandon Johnson, who made his hay as an undrafted rookie. But it's like the conversation has suddenly shifted because Denver has top heavy players at the receiver position that are they going to carry 5 guys? Are they going to carry 6? Like, how are the special teams rules going to impact how many guys they carry at these positions versus other positions where they could? I thought you did a great job of touching on it last week in the episode of Locked On Broncos. You did. But could we see more offensive linemen now in the 53 because of the new kickoff and kick return rules? I have no idea how it's going to really pan out. I think it makes for a lot of tough conversations to be happening when roster trim down time is there. I don't want to be part of those conversations, unfortunately. Like, that would be very stressful because you are going to have to release some good players that you have on this team, but can Troy fit into that vision? I think a big part of it, if Bo Nix is the starting quarterback, no matter what, no matter if Troy has a terrible training camp or even a terrible preseason, I think you're going to see him on the roster no matter what because he is a talented player. He dropped a little bit in the NFL draft, but that's not an indicator on his character. I don't know really what happened in that situation to force that, but you look at his production as a receiver, my goodness, he is a talented and fun player to watch. Is he going to have that big role as a rookie? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it is right now considering how the room is, but there's a distinct possibility he could emerge very quickly here for the Broncos offense. And that's the question that we have. So when I go to practice here today, obviously Broncos country, all eyes are going to be on the quarterback competition, but I'll be looking at Riley Moss. I'll be looking at Jonah Ellis and Troy Franklin and giving my thoughts. You can get that here on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos, where Sayre and I, we're going to sit down and talk about what happened on the first day of mandatory minicamp. We're excited about it in Broncos country. We can't wait to see you then.